Welcome back to Creepshow, where we delve into the darker side of human nature. Today we're exploring the haunting tales of 10 killers on death row. While their crimes are undeniably horrific, their final moments reveal a more complex truth about fear, regret, and humanity. Join me as we uncover the heartbreaking stories that remind us that even the most monstrous individuals can evoke sympathy. Let's get started. It's easy to be callous about a murderer on death row. It gets harder, though, when you watch every step they take toward the execution chamber. For all the horrors these people have brought into the world, they're still human beings, afraid to die, even if they deserve it. Sometimes the final moments of a killer can reveal all the horrors that made them the monsters they became. And sometimes even a death deserved can be nothing short of heartbreaking. Number 10. Joe Arridy, the happiest prisoner on death row. Joe Arridy was called the happiest prisoner on death row. With the mental capacity of a 6-year-old, he faced his fate with a bewildering innocence. Though he had confessed to the murder of a 15-year-old girl, a crime committed by a man named Frank Aguilar, Arridy never seemed to fully grasp the gravity of his situation. In his cell, he passed the time playing with children's toys. His favorite was a toy train gifted to him by the warden, and he simply couldn't understand that he wouldn't be able to take it with him. When his cellmate Angelo Agnes asked him, "When you go, Joe, you'll give me your train, won't you?" Joe shook his head firmly. "No," he replied, "I take my train with me." However, after a play date in Agnes's cell, where they shared the joy of playing trains together, the childlike Arridy was touched. When it was over, he promised, "If I go, yes, I give my train to Agnes." But even in those final moments, he still didn't comprehend what was coming. As his mother hugged him one last time, he stared at her blankly, unable to understand why she was so upset. When the guards led him to the gas chamber, Arridy remained oblivious to the reality of his fate, revealing the tragic intersection of innocence and horror in his story. Number 9. George Stinney Jr., the youngest boy on the electric chair. In 1944, the police department in Columbia, South Carolina, faced a devastating call. 2 young girls, one aged 11 and the other only 8, had been found dead in a ditch, brutally beaten with an iron pipe while picking wildflowers. The situation grew even more disturbing when an old woman reported that her 14-year-old grandson had just confessed to committing the crime. That boy's name was George Stinney Jr. When he arrived at the police station, he directed them to the murder weapon and said, "I'm really sorry. I didn't want to kill them girls." Stinney's trial was alarmingly swift, lasting only 2 hours. Many today believe he was framed for the crime. Regardless of the truth, George Stinney Jr. became the youngest American sentenced to death in the 20th century. After spending 81 days in a prison cell, 80 kilometers, 50 miles away from home, moved out of fear that locals would lynch him if they found him, he was taken to the electric chair. On the day of his execution, the boy was so short that he had to sit on a Bible to reach the headpiece. The straps meant to secure him were far too large, leaving him vulnerable. As the electric shock coursed through his body, he convulsed violently. Tragically, his mask slipped off, exposing his terrified, tearful face to the onlookers. In 2014, George Stinney Jr. was posthumously exonerated. Investigators concluded that his confession had been coerced and that he had been wrongfully convicted without a fair trial, shedding light on a heartbreaking chapter of injustice and the complexities of a young life lost to the horrors of the legal system. Number 8. Christopher Newton, the man who wanted to die. At 120 kilograms, 265 pounds, Christopher Newton's size presented a significant challenge for his executioner. During what would become the longest lethal injection in history, the executioner struggled for over 2 hours to find a vein in Newton's arms. At one point, they even granted him a bathroom break while they tried to figure it out. Newton, who had endured a hard and unhappy life, had deliberately orchestrated his imprisonment. He left a trail of evidence at the scene of a break-in, ensuring that he would be caught. Once behind bars, he made it his mission to end up on death row. In a fit of rage, he killed a cellmate over a trivial matter, slamming his head to the floor, stomping on his throat, and strangling him, all while laughing as officers pulled him away. When interrogated, he refused to answer any questions until they promised him the death penalty. When the moment of execution finally arrived, Newton appeared almost eager. For his final statement, he joked, "I could sure go for some beef stew," chuckling as the executioner struggled to insert the needle into his veins. It took 10 attempts before the executioner successfully found a vein. Finally, after 2 grueling hours, the poison rushed into Newton's system, bringing an end to a life marked by turmoil and a grim desire for finality. Number 7. Ray Rector, the man who saved his last meal for later. Ray Rector spent much of his life moving in and out of jail cells until 1981, when he made a decision that ensured he'd never move out of one again. After getting into a dispute over a $3 cover charge at a dance club, a heated Ricky pulled out a gun and shot 3 people, one of whom was struck in the head. In a panic, Ricky fled the scene, but his family managed to convince him to turn himself in. When the police arrived to pick him up, he put the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. The shot intended to end his life instead left him with severe brain damage, effectively performing a lobotomy. After the incident, Ricky's mental state changed drastically. He had the mind of a child. He would scream in fear when the lights went out, terrified of the dark. He often bombarded others with questions about dogs and would hop on his bed, convinced he was hunting Indians. At times, he insisted that guards were letting live alligators into his cell. When the time for his last meal arrived, Ray Rector ordered a lavish spread that included steak, fried chicken, and pecan pie. However, he left the pie untouched. When a guard asked him about it, Ricky replied that he was saving it for later, a haunting testament to the innocence and confusion that marked his final moments. Number 6. Rudolph Tyner, the man who was killed on death row. Rudolph Tyner found himself in a cell next to Donald Henry Gaskins, a man infamous for being known as the meanest man in America. Gaskins was a serial killer who had claimed the lives of 13 people, including a pregnant mother. Though Gaskins was a monster, he became the closest thing Tyner had to a friend on death row. Tyner's journey to death row began with a robbery gone tragically wrong. At just 18 years old, he attempted to rob a grocery store run by an elderly couple. When Bill Moon, the store owner, refused to hand over the money, Tyner thought he could intimidate him by shooting him in the arm. "If I shot Moon in the arm," he later recounted, "I would get some money." In a moment of panic, he fired a warning shot, accidentally killing Moon. When Moon's wife started screaming, Tyner killed her as well. Captured later that night, Tyner confessed to the horrific acts, and soon he found himself sharing a space with a cold-blooded serial killer. Unbeknownst to him, Gaskins was plotting his demise. Gaskins gave Tyner a radio speaker, claiming it would allow them to communicate between their cells. Desperate for companionship, Tyner held the plastic case to his ear, unaware that it contained C4 explosives. When Gaskins hit the trigger, the bomb detonated, and Tyner met a gruesome end. Investigations revealed that Moon's son had provided Gaskins with the explosives and paid him to kill Tyner. Yet Gaskins likely would have taken pleasure in the act regardless of the motive. He later recounted the story of Tyner's death, gleefully stating, "The last thing he heard was me laughing." Number 5. Randy Wools, the addict who helped his executioner find a vein. Randy Wools had been a drug addict since the age of 13, spending much of his life injecting various substances into his veins. His journey ended after he filled his body with Valium, leading him into a drug-fueled frenzy. In a fit of madness, Wools went to a drive-in movie theater and brutally attacked the ticket seller with a tire iron. He then slit her throat, piled everything from her booth on top of her, and set it all ablaze. When he was arrested, he had no recollection of the horrific act and could only mutter, "I was out of my mind." Unfortunately for Wools, this wasn't enough to spare him from death row. In his final moments, he dedicated his last words to the woman he had killed. "I'm sorry for the victim and family," he expressed. "I wish there was something I could do to make it all right." Years of drug abuse had left Wools's veins so collapsed that the execution technicians struggled to find a suitable place to inject him. However, in a grim twist of fate, the experienced wolves offered to help. He guided them to a suitable spot and assisted them in easing the needle into his vein, the very action that would ultimately lead to the end of his life. Number 4. Mark Strowman, the killer whose victim tried to save his life. Mark Strowman identified himself as a white supremacist, and after 9/11s, he felt compelled to go on a killing spree, claiming a twisted sense of patriotic duty. He took to the streets armed with a gun, dubbing himself the Arab Slayer. His first victim was a Pakistani man whom he shot in a grocery store on September 15, 2001. Just 6 days later, Strowman entered a convenience store and shot Rais Bhuiyan, a Muslim from Bangladesh, with a shotgun. Bhuiyan survived the brutal attack, and police eventually apprehended Strowman, but not before he had killed again. Upon his arrest, Strowman was unapologetic. He saw himself as a patriot and embraced the label of hero as he faced death row. But Rais Bhuiyan had a different perspective. His faith compelled him to forgive Strowman, and he was determined to do everything he could to save his life. Bhuiyan started a petition and filed a lawsuit, striving to get the man who shot him off death row. In a remarkable turn of events, Strowman and Bhuiyan began exchanging letters. As Strowman learned that the man he had attempted to kill was actively trying to save him, he felt a profound change within himself. He expressed that because Bhuiyan had taught him not to hate, he was facing his death more content than he had ever been. Despite Bhuiyan's relentless efforts, he was unable to save Strowman from execution. In his final moments, Strowman shared a poignant lesson he had learned. Hate causes a lifetime of pain. Number 3. Brandon Rode, the death row prisoner who wasn't allowed to commit suicide. On the day he was scheduled to die, Brandon Joseph Rode smuggled a razor blade into his cell. Desperate to take control of his fate, he confided in a cellmate that he didn't want to be put down like a dog. With this mindset, on the day of his execution, he hid under his blanket and slashed his arms and neck. When the guards discovered what was happening, they rushed to his aid. By then, Rode was already unconscious and bleeding profusely. The urgency of the situation prompted immediate action. They transported him to the hospital and managed to patch him up. Though he suffered serious brain damage from the attempt, they were able to save his life. Remarkably, within a week he was healthy enough to move again. Yet, just 1 week after his suicide attempt, the very same authorities who had refused to let him die brought him into the execution chamber. Less than 7 days after they saved him, they prepared to inject lethal drugs into his veins. In a cruel twist of fate, the system had intervened to prolong his life only to end it in a matter of days. Number 2. Philip Workman, the man who gave his last meal to the homeless. Philip Ray Workman found himself in a dire situation while attempting to hold up a Wendy's restaurant. When the police arrived, he tried to flee, but was tackled by Officer Ronald Oliver. In the ensuing struggle, Workman shot Oliver in the chest, tragically killing the officer. In that moment, he not only took a life, but also sealed his own fate, ensuring his place on death row with little chance of escape. Realizing the gravity of his actions, Workman sought a way to leave some good in the world before his execution. He asked the guards to give his last meal, a vegetarian pizza, to a homeless person instead of keeping it for himself. Unfortunately, the guards refused his request, and Workman was left to die alone, unable to help anyone. However, the story took a poignant turn when a woman named Donna Spangler heard about Workman's wish. Moved by his intent, she took it upon herself to ensure he received his redemption. Spangler raised funds and donated 150 pizzas to a local rescue mission on Workman's behalf. Philip Workman was trying to do a good deed, she insisted, and no one would help him. Through her efforts, Workman's legacy transformed from one of tragedy to a symbol of compassion, highlighting the potential for goodness even in the darkest of circumstances. Number 1. Ted Bundy, the monster with a mother. Ted Bundy's name is synonymous with evil. He was responsible for the deaths of dozens of women, ultimately facing execution after killing a 12-year-old child. No one in the world felt sorry when he died, except for his mother. Bundy's mother, Louise, was a devout churchgoer, and like any mother, she loved her son fiercely. She steadfastly refused to believe the horrific accusations against him, insisting that Ted Bundy does not go around killing women and little children. However, as Bundy confessed and the evidence against him mounted, it became increasingly difficult for her to cling to the belief that her little boy was innocent. Despite the overwhelming evidence, she continued to defend him until her last days, lamenting that people portrayed him as more of a monster than he truly was. On the day of his execution, Louise called Ted twice, hoping to share her final words with the boy who had grown into one of the most infamous serial killers in history. In her heart, he remained her child, and in that last call, she expressed her unwavering love. "You'll always be my precious son." Thanks for watching Creepshow. We've seen that behind the chilling facade of murderers on death row lie stories filled with tragedy, misunderstanding, and even innocence. If you found these tales as haunting as I did, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more chilling content. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do these stories change how you view those who commit unspeakable acts? Until next time, stay curious and remember, the darkness often holds secrets we never expected.